Welcome to In All Honesty, the podcast where we get real about life and all the problems that come with it. I'm Michelle Elman, and I'm that friend who we all know is a little bit too honest. You might not come to me when you get back together with your ex, but I'll be there for you when it all goes tits up. Welcome back to In All Honesty, and today we're talking about the difference between dating in your 20s and 30s. So for a little bit of context, my first relationship was when I was 20 years old, my third year of university, and it was a pretty short relationship, roughly 8 months, technically 3 months, but 8 months of dating around took a really long time to become official. And then very short 3 months because turns out we were just not a match. And I'm not even sure I even asked at any point if I liked him. So when that ended, I remember that feeling of breaking up and feeling this immense amount of relief, which led me to my 20s and being single for the majority of it. For 8 years of my 20s, I was single. And for 5 out of 8 of those years, I dated around a lot. For 3 of those years, I was very consciously single. And it was because I was so focused on my career. I had just been diagnosed with PTSD, so I was dealing with a lot of mental health issues. And so I was prioritizing that for probably, I would say, 21 to 24. I was also recovering from that breakup because as much as it was a short relationship, it gave me a lot of realizations around what I was looking for, how I ended up in a relationship where I'm not even sure if I liked the guy, let alone loved the guy. And also, frankly, it was a relationship where I was treated really badly. And so right after that, it was a moment in my life where I realized I'd rather be single and figure out what I want for my life before I added someone else to the mix. And when I was about 24, I realized that was the tipping point of wanting a bit more balance in my life. I was in a point in my career where I was so happy and so content, but I kind of wanted to share that with someone and not necessarily wanting a long-term relationship, but absolutely wanting dating in my life. And it took me a while to find my feet in the dating world, but I eventually did and had the best time. And then, as you know, I got into a relationship. I was actually 27, but it was my 28th birthday party. And then I was in a relationship for 3 years, and then I found myself single again at 30 years old. And I think because there's so much stigma, conversation around the age of 30, which, yes, is not an old age, but is quite a milestone, an age that's very much attached to fertility and the decline of your fertility, the age at which a lot of people get married or want to be married by that age. Being single again when you're 30, there was a thought in my head. And I have worked so hard on loving being single. I, as a person, have a lot of single positivity in me. I do adore being single and I love dating. It was just the societal message of, wow, you're 30, you are on the right milestones, the right life path of hitting all the steps of spending most of your 20s single, then being in a long-term relationship, then living together for 2 years, then at 30 years old, trying for a baby and getting married. I was hitting all the steps. And then before I knew it was just, for lack of a better term, back at the beginning. And I couldn't help but hear the voices in my head of like, oh, you're not going to be able to have a baby. You're not going to get married, all of these things. And a lot of fear-mongering around 30. And as much as I don't believe that stuff, it's still a really loud message that exists in the world. If I'm being real, I had a lot of fear around it, which then led me to want to rip the Band-Aid off. And I did. 3 weeks after my breakup, I went on my first date. This was when I was on my solo trip in Dubai. And it was the best thing I could have done because all of this nonsense and fear around dating in your 30s was truly that. It was nonsense. And it took me actually going on a date to realize that. I mean, the funniest thing is my first date back in the UK was a bit of a shock to the system because it was a very flirty guy and he was very charming, charismatic. But I won't lie, and I dated him for a few months after that. The first thing he said to me on the date was, I like your salt and pepper, as in my hair. And I hadn't realized I was that grey until he'd commented on it. And I was like, wow, a brutal welcome back to dating in your 30s. Because I do dye my hair, but I had left it for a really long time because I had other priorities in my life, like healing from my breakup. But it was one of those things of like, you know what? Maybe it's a nice thing that he complimented it but maybe I also didn't need it to be pointed out. Going on these dates, and I remember especially before that first date in Dubai, the thing that was going through my head was like, okay, I loved dating the last time I was single, and there were times in my long-term relationship, I know you probably shouldn't say this, but there were times I missed being single. There were times I missed dating, and I would talk to my now ex about it. Within the relationship, we both talked about how we missed being single, how we missed dating. I mean, very ironic given how that relationship ended. I actually thought it was a healthy, positive thing that we both spoke about how we both loved being single a lot. And there are elements and positives to both things, both being in a relationship and also being single. But so when I was in Dubai and I was like, you loved being single last time. So what are we going to do differently this time? When I thought about my 20s, there was one thing I probably had regrets around. And that's I'm a very safety conscious person. Like I have 3 locks on my door. I check the door one too many times when I'm going to bed. And largely, I think this stems from a lot of my hospital experiences. But it also means like the idea of having a stranger in my flat is something that has blocked and prevented my dating life in certain ways. And because I was in a hotel in Dubai, I was like, well, now's the time to challenge that and face that fear of like, yes, women are safety conscious for a reason and it's sensible and you need those precautions in place. And at the same time, if you are going into your dating life with fear in any area, it's going to affect how you date. And so that's why I had this motivation to start dating while I was out in Dubai because of that element of being in a hotel and feeling safer and knowing I can meet someone in the lobby and that there will be people around. And I made a conscious decision that day that the difference I wanted between dating in my 20s and dating in my 30s is I wasn't going to be led by fear in any aspect. I ended up going into this dating period this year, and it's a dating period that I genuinely believe I'm going to look back on, tell stories. When I think about my 30s, I'm going to think about this summer. I'm going to think about all the incredible dates I went on and all the amazing men I met. And I remember there were points this summer where I was turning to my friends and I was like, I can't believe I would have died without experiencing this. That I thought I had made the most of my dating life in my 20s, and I really hadn't. There was so much more I wanted to experience, and I was learning so much from each person I was with. And also, the experiences I was having in my dating life were so much more diverse. I think in my 20s, I was so led by what the guy suggested that I wasn't being as proactive in saying what kind of dates I wanted and how I wanted to be dating. And in my 30s, I changed that. And it was one of the best things I could have done. A really big part of that was Hinge. They were responsible for nearly every date I had this summer. From a few spontaneous meetups when I was traveling to a few longer connections, I had so much fun meeting new people and enjoying meaningful experiences with them. And I honestly had the best time. And I feel like that happened for a number of reasons. I've always found success on Hinge by being my most authentic and honest self. And I feel like my breakup amplified that this year because I wanted to be transparent and honest about the state of mind I was in, how fresh I was off a breakup, and also so they had a choice on whether they felt ready to date me and if that's what they were looking for. As I mentioned, coming back to dating apps fresh off a breakup can feel a little bit daunting, but there was almost a really welcoming familiarity to Hinge, especially with an app that I'd had so much success with in the past. When I was single for 8 years, Hinge was probably the app that I used the most. It was responsible for me meeting the majority of people I dated in my 20s and even responsible for the long-term relationships I got out of it too. So going back on the app was almost a familiar feeling, and it was actually a nice flashback to go back on my profile and see what I had written 3 years before. But obviously, all of that needed to change. I needed to refresh it to make sure it was up to date. And coming back to the data pool in my 30s, I was more transparent than I've ever been. And I feel like that really reflected in the people I was meeting. I feel like honesty begets honesty and vulnerability begets vulnerability. And because I was being so open about how fresh my breakup was, as a result, there are a lot of guys who were then honest with me. They would tell me a sort of version of a story. When we'd first get on the date, they tell me like the more socially acceptable, toned down version. And then I'd tell them the truth. And then they'd be like, well, actually, here's actually what I'm going through. and then be more honest themselves. And it was a really beautiful thing to enter dates with so much honesty. There was more open communication. And ultimately, what it made me feel like was that it really reflected the amount of respect we had for each other. Every time I've thought back to one of the dates I've had this summer, it just brings this smile to my face. And I genuinely think when I'm older, the stories I'm going to be telling for years to come, because the people I met were just so amazing. I love that on the app you have more space to write information about yourself, and also that you can state your dating intentions very clearly. There are so many different options. You can say short term, open to long term, open to short term, whether you're looking for a life partner, whether you're monogamous, whether you're non-monogamous. And all of that just leads to greater clarity when you actually end up on the date. Since you can get really specific on Hinge, it allowed me to narrow down what I was looking for and the dating intentions to make sure we aligned. All through the summer, my dating profile said I was looking for short term. And now I've changed my dating intentions to say that I'm short term, open to long term. Because I am open to long term now. Especially in your 30s, we often talk about people bringing in past baggage. And I think that's such a negative way of phrasing it. Because one thing I know for sure, and something I've felt, is that dating in your 30s as opposed to in your 20s is everyone has a past, but that past makes them better. That past means everyone has been affected by someone, something, and that it's often made them better. It's given them time and space to learn from their past experiences. And also people are entering the conversations around dating in a much more nuanced way, because we've all realized that love is really nuanced and that you can have past feelings for someone else but not want to be with them. You can want to go on dates without being fully healed, as if fully healed is a thing in the first place. And more so that people are dipping their toe into the dating pond, not actually 100% sure what they're looking for. And by dating, they're discovering what's best for them. And I think having that flexibility and that transparency, as long as you're communicating openly, is the best way to do it. And that's what I found this summer. Since I was being open about my breakup, the way I found this the easiest was on Hinge. Instead of typing messages, you can actually voice note. So I was able to explain the situation with a lot more nuance and complexity. I could tell the story easily and effortlessly because it actually had my voice in it. So it was also that the other person could hear the tone in which I was saying it. When it's written down, it can come across as a lot more intense. But I think when you put it in a voice note, they can actually hear how it's hitting you, how it's affecting you, how you feel about it. And that's because the voice tells you so much more than written communication. Did you know 38% of communication is through tone of voice, and only 7% is actually the words you're saying in written communication? And so being able to voice note, not just within the app, but also on your profile, gives so much depth and more understanding to the person you are before you even meet. As all my friends will tell you, I love voice notes so much that I actually have a voice note on my Hinge profile. I'm going to play it for you right now, but I recorded this in Dubai at about 2 o'clock in the morning. It was roughly 3 weeks after my breakup. And I don't know why this came to mind, but I've not changed it. And I think it actually perfectly summarizes the kind of person I am. So the prompt says, my most controversial opinion is... My most controversial opinion is that reality TV shows are not trash, especially the dating ones. They're fascinating insight into human behavior, and I think you can actually learn a lot from them. Give me some Married at First Sight, give me some Love is Blind. I love them all. I just don't love them enough to go on them myself. And that is the voice note that is on my profile. The thing about dating in your 30s is that people have dated around, and that shapes you for the good and for the bad. And when you're open about that, it actually leads to greater emotional intimacy. I know there's a stereotype that you shouldn't talk about exes on a first date, or you shouldn't talk about past relationships. But actually, I found that with a lot of them, they were coming off the back of things like divorce or a breakup. And so they wanted to talk about it too. And it was allowing both of us to give each other more context to how we were acting. And so that if something happened or we changed our mind, it wasn't a shock, it wasn't a surprise, because we both knew we were going through turbulent times in our life. We were processing our things, and also we could support each other through that. There was something really beautiful in the fact that with all the guys I met, no one was pretending. We weren't pretending to be something we weren't. We weren't pretending to be more healed or further along in our healing than we actually were. And that was okay, because all humans deserve support and we don't heal in isolation. And sometimes dating is the thing that can really give you a pep in your step while you're going through the heartbreak as well. And that's what I really found this summer. It was this beautiful dichotomy of having multiple feelings going on at the same time. And a lot of the energy I had this summer was because the dates I was going on. They were giving me this new lease of life, also a lot of hope about the future, and ultimately a lot of joy and a lot of fun. This year, another thing that I was doing differently and I want to keep doing is I was doing a phone call or a video call before a first date. And I found it was a great way to cut out that wasting time, because sometimes you would get on the call and within 2 seconds, you know you're not a great match. But 90% of the calls were incredible. And because they were so incredible, it actually made me look forward to the first date even more. There was one guy I dated, I actually think it was the first guy I dated back in the UK, who said to me on the phone that he's actually never looked forward to a first date. I spoke about this with actually one of the guys I was dating this summer, that our first date was so incredible because we actually had never looked forward to meeting a stranger more. Because by the time we were on a first date, it didn't feel like we were strangers. We'd had 2 or 3 phone calls, and at the end of one of the phone calls, he was like, I almost feel like I already know you. And it was that feeling of like knowing with certainty that we were going to get on. And I think if you're short on time, but you still want to make dating a priority, this is a really great way to do it, because you don't even need to venture out of the house or spend time putting on makeup, getting ready for a date, until you know you're actually going to get on. What I also love is that when you actually meet, Hinge asks you whether you meet and they track that data, which really affects how they design the app, because after all, it is the app that is designed to be deleted. This year, I really also took some time out to reflect on what I wanted my profile to say. And so I made a lot of changes and added a lot of videos, which was not an option the last time I was single. They're very like silly, goofy videos. There's a video of me falling in when paddleboarding. That's what you call confidence. There's also a video of me being in the gym, throwing a slam ball on the floor and it coming back and whacking me in the face. And I really feel like that reflects my true personality. I've also changed up the prompts on my profile. One of the prompts on my page says, this year I really want to. And for me, it's that I really want to go on more fun dates that involve activities. And I love this prompt being on my page because it really challenges people to think outside the box. Look, I love a pub date. I love a bar date. But as someone who doesn't drink a lot and someone who's been on a lot of pub and bar dates, I want to be going on more different dates this year. And that is what I have done. This prompt has been responsible for a Scrabble date, an arcade date, a squash date. We've had picnics in the park. We've been doing interesting things this year. And the best thing about an interesting date is it means that even if you aren't a great match, you've had a great time spending time with each other because you have something to focus on. It also makes the conversation easier because if it's a little bit dry, you don't know what to talk about, you can focus on the activity. Also, I find that by what they choose, it tells you a lot about a person's personality. And also, especially with the ones that are a lot more competitive, like the arcade dates, the board game dates, all of those, you have such a playful energy about it. You also discover who's really competitive and who's not. Going into the next year, I also really want to bring the self-assuredness that I had this year in my dating into 2025. There is something about the fact that when you are in a long-term relationship, you realize your attraction to someone cannot be that fragile. Like when you are dating someone long term, they've seen you in all kinds of ways. I don't know why in the past I thought you could strong arm a relationship, because ultimately it takes a lot to make a long term relationship work. And when someone dates you, they will see you first thing in the morning, they will see you when you're feeling ill. My ex saw me right after eye surgery when I literally couldn't have a shower for 3 days. The reality is, if you keep dating someone, there are moments when it will be hard, and you want someone who's not only invested, but who also isn't scared to do a little hard work when the relationship gets a little bit more difficult. And I think that reflects in my dating profile now. Because one of the things I've changed is I now have makeup-free photos on my Hinge profile. Because that's how I am when you date me. 90% of my life, I am makeup-free. And so I want to make sure my dating profile is reflecting how I actually am. And do I have a really glamorous aspect to my job? Absolutely. But is that the person you're dating? No, not really. That is me one day out of the month. And so I want my profile to show the person who's actually showing up on dates. One of the ways you can reflect on your own dating life is to ask yourself what is important to you when it comes to your dating life. This is one way to look at your values, and I've run you through how to look through your values before on past episodes. But also, another way to do this is to write 100 reasons why someone would want to date you. It's so important for you to know what you bring to the table. And when you know that, you date with a different energy. Knowing what you bring to the table means you'll be less sensitive to rejection. And also, you will always have more reasons than the person you are on a date with to know that you are valuable, you are good enough, and you're not putting that in the hands of someone else, which means it's not out of your control. When you know the 100 reasons why someone should want to date you, you walk onto your date with your head held high and knowing that if they're not interested, that's great because there is someone else who will. And if you do both these things before refreshing your profile will also have a different energy too, because it can't not. When you know what you bring to the table, it's going to come across not only in your pictures, but the prompts you're putting on your profile too. And if you're really struggling, grab a bunch of your friends because sometimes you don't know how you're coming across and you need a friend to tell you. So make sure you get people around you who you trust, who will be honest, but in a very kind way, and make it a fun evening where you go through your profiles together and update them and refresh them to make sure your Hinge profile matches just that. People change, and so it's really important that your profile changes too. We want to keep people up to date with the current version of us. Give a new prompt like "this year I want to" a try, and come up with something that will encourage interesting responses so that you start off conversations on a really nice note. So if you haven't refreshed your Hinge profile for a while, now is the time to go do it. I think the other part of dating in your 30s was I just didn't care how I came across. I think in my 20s, I was so obsessed with trying to impress them. And there was just a flip around the age of 25 when I realized, actually, did they impress me? Did they match my criteria? Putting my focus back on something I could control really changed the way that I dated. And knowing that I could actually decide who I wanted in a relationship absolutely came from my first relationship, where I realized I was so busy asking whether he liked me, I didn't care to ask whether I liked him back. And I think what also changed between my 20s and 30s is in my 20s, I had so many insecurities around whether I was lovable enough. I had a lot of doubts on whether I would actually be good in a relationship because I'd had such a short first relationship. I didn't know whether I could actually be healthy. I knew all the right things, I'd done all the personal growth, but to actually live it is a very different thing. And what I realized by being in my last relationship, no matter how it ended, was that I wasn't the problem. Where in the past I used to be quite anxious when I was dating, I found once I was actually secure and stable and trusting the person, none of that came out in a relationship. And so going into my dating life now, knowing that I am easy to love, I am easy to date, I am very healthy in a relationship, can only better my dating life. And it means that I go on the dates ready for something. And that's why my dating profile says short term, open to long term, because I am open. I'm open to whatever is going to fall into my lap. And I'm curious and I'm flexible. And ultimately, all of these questions we get asked of, oh, why are you still single? What are you looking for? They're very determinant questions, but all of the answers are really dependent on who's sitting in front of me. Like, yes, I'm open to a long term relationship, but are you the kind of person I want to be in a long term relationship with? Because that's the aspect we need to be looking at. And when we ask someone, what are you looking for? Well, it depends. It depends how this works out. It depends how our conversation goes. Depends how our first date goes. And I think that's where, by being in a long term relationship and coming back into dating, I've realized that actually who you're interacting with often changes how healthy you are in the dynamic. That you can be a really secure, stable person in a healthy relationship and then be with someone who makes you feel really anxious. And that's not the person you're meant to be with. You're meant to be with someone who makes you feel safe, your most secure version of yourself. And if that person is bringing out all your anxious or avoidance behaviors, that's not the person for you. And this week, we've got a voice note from one of you. And this week's voice note is all about dating apps.
Hi Michelle, my name's Natasha. I'm 27 and I'm sending this voice note about online dating and kind of obsessive behaviour around online dating platforms. I just want to start out by saying I absolutely love your book, The Joy of Being Selfish. After reading it myself, I bought it for two of my friends, my mum and my cousin. It's really helped them to understand my boundaries and also help them in setting their own as well. So thank you for writing something that's so beautiful and honest, and something that's really needed at this kind of time in everyone's lives. So a bit of a background. I've been single for quite a few years, probably about 4 or 5 years. Consider myself quite an independent woman. I'm strong and I absolutely love my life. I've got a really great support network, friends, family, and I do what I want whenever I want. I take myself on dates, I take myself on holidays. I don't have a need to be in a relationship, similar to what you say on Instagram, because if I want to do something, I will do it, even if it's by myself. And I have no shame in that. I really enjoy being on my own and being with my friends and my family. I think I'm a version of myself that 15-year-old me could only dream of. And I'm really thankful to be able to get to that stage, and thankful that platforms like yours have helped me get to where I am. So that's a bit of a background. So rationally now, I know that I want a relationship, but I don't need one. So this behavior of how I'm acting around online dating is kind of honestly scaring me, because it's not rationally who I am. I found that I obsess over everything. I will, through my day, always be thinking, oh, I need to go on and check who's matched with me, or what if they've messaged back. I put myself, I know you don't use the term self boundaries, but I do for my own experience. So I put myself self boundaries in of not having the notifications on, so that every time it pops up, I'm not distracted on what I'm doing. If I'm hanging out with friends and it comes up, I don't ignore them, stuff like that. So I don't have notifications on, because I know that that increases my anxiety. However, that then leads to me thinking, oh, what is anyone messaged back? Oh, I need to check now. And I obsessively check the apps no matter what. And whatever I come across annoys me, because I'm spending so much time on them. I have a lot of hobbies, I have a lot of interests, I have a lot of friends outside of this kind of thing, and they're being impeded by me always thinking about going on the apps. And yeah, it's very out of character for me. I'm not sure why I'm doing it. So I guess my question is, do you have any recommendations on, when you are using online dating, making sure that it's not restricting what you're doing in your life? So making sure that you have, your distance between your work, your friends, your experiences, and your online dating, and able to put it away when it needs to be put away. Thank you so much.
Yes, I remember this. So, as I said previously, I was single for 3 years in my 20s where I wasn't dating. And I remember the rockiness of then going back into dating, of realizing I had become this really body confident person. I had become this person who was very self assured, had a lot of self esteem. And then suddenly I started dating again, or even just being on the dating apps, and it started getting shaky again. And I was like, where's this coming from? And ultimately, what I believe is happening is it's very easy to feel confident when you aren't in the dating pool, because you're not needing to take in anyone else's opinion. And so then when you first start dating and you're factoring in what someone else thinks about you, it's really hard to keep that solid core of what you believe you are and how you know about yourself. And ultimately, it's a positive thing. Ultimately, it's you getting more vulnerable, being more open to someone else affecting that. Now, we don't want other people affecting our opinion of ourselves and how we estimate ourselves. But what we can do is be very careful and selective about what we are actually paying attention to. And by doing this, we can minimize the amount of rejection we feel. So, when you are obsessively checking apps, what you are also obsessively checking is people unmatching you, people not replying to you. They're basically your brain's way of looking for something that is going to hurt you. And the reason why that is because you're paying more attention to the lack of replies, the unmatches, than the people who are actually replying. And actually, this is where I think sometimes notifications can actually be better. That you will only look at the app when there is something to reply to, as opposed to checking the app to see if someone has replied. Ultimately, it's a very transitional phase when you first start dating to realize, okay, there has to be a way where I am interacting with these people without them actually becoming the source of my validation, or the way I am confident in myself is no longer in the people that I date. So I want to validate this shaky period where you're unsure why you're obsessively checking, but I also think we have to look at what's underneath it. How does it make you feel when you check these apps? What feeling are you searching for when you click on the app? It might be the word attention, it might be the word connection, it might be community. And whatever feeling and emotion comes up, maybe you're wanting love, maybe you're wanting care, maybe you're wanting communication. That is what you're searching for. And so, therefore, once you've figured that out, let's say you're looking for connection, find an alternative source. What is an alternative source where you can get connection that is more reliable and more certain? And that's how you change it. So we give ourselves grace for this period of time. And what we do is we go back to all the resources we had from our single period where we weren't dating and how we used to build up our self esteem at that point. Use all those tools that you know and also reduce the amount of rejection that can actually impact your day. If you're not labeling it as rejection, you won't feel it as rejection. And a lot of the things that you are labeling as rejection are things that you're actually paying attention to that don't need to be noticed. And so I think that is the key. When it comes to your limits around it, it could be that you only let yourself go on dating apps at a certain hour of the day. It could be that you're not allowed to go on dating apps during your working hours. It could be that you're not allowed to reply to anyone on a dating app until you've replied to all your other friends too. By doing all of this, you are deciding where you want dating to sit within your priorities. If you put it at the top of your list, no wonder your rise and fall of your mood is going to go along with whether you have matches or not. But if you are putting it appropriately underneath your family and friends, underneath the people who have spent years in your life supporting and loving you, then it's also going to carry less weight there too. I hope that helps. I really empathize and feel where you're coming from. And thank you so much for all your lovely, kind words as well. The other thing I noticed about being in your 30s is the fact that everyone feels like they have a duty of care, especially because I was dating more short term. There's a lot of conversation around it being trashy when you're having casual relationships, and I just don't think that's the case. We still had the same level of respect. We still had the same duty of care. We were honest and communicative. There were moments where I said to them, like, hey, look, I think you're falling a bit hard, and I'm not sure I have the capacity to be able to support you right now through that. And we decided to call it quits. And we both mutually decided on that. At one point, I remember there was a guy who was saying, like, well, maybe we can just see how it goes. And I was like, no, I think we're now in dangerous territory of like, I think we were connecting a bit too quickly. And he thanked me for my emotional intelligence and he also thanked me for my honesty. And those are experiences that I think I would have wished for in my 20s. I would have been so relieved to know that dating in your 30s is nothing like I thought it would be. It's so much better. And I'm so glad I didn't listen to that fear and I did just rip that band-aid off. Because what ended up happening, I had this most beautiful experience of changing my definition of what a successful dating life looks like. I think unconsciously throughout my 20s, I always wanted a long term relationship. And therefore, that's whether I said it or not, unconsciously, I believe the only way having a successful dating life looked is if you ended up in a relationship. And this summer, this year has proved to me that that is not true. I had a successful dating year this year and I'm still single. And that's great because success doesn't always mean ending up in a long term relationship. Success can mean you having the most fun meeting interesting, fascinating people who you resonate with and align with, who teach you something about your life and who can support you through a period of your life. There's that saying of people come into your life for a season, reason, or a lifetime. And for this year, I met a lot of people who came into my life for a season, and I'm very grateful to them for all the experiences I had. The thing I am learning at the moment, I thought I'd go for a dating thing I'm learning at the moment, is to be led by curiosity. Sometimes we want to decide how we feel about someone too prematurely, and that often doesn't work. Instead, what I like to do is I ask myself two questions. Did I enjoy my time spent with them? And am I still curious about them? There are much more practical ways to measure whether you should go on a second date than to ask yourself whether you like them or whether you see a future with them or whether you can keep dating them, whether they're the one. All of these things are very narrow outlooks. And that's where this curiosity comes in of if you're still curious about a person, keep dating, even if you aren't sure. And ultimately, it's reminding yourself that you're not in a rush to make a decision, that if you are still unsure about someone, that does not mean you are leading them on. You can keep going on dates and exploring your connection until you're sure, and you're allowed to have that time. And so that's the thing I'm learning right now, is giving myself time to make my dating decisions, not in a rush to decide too prematurely. And also knowing that if it's a few dates in and I have to have that awkward conversation of, oh, I don't think we're at the place where we should be, then I'm confident and able and capable to have those hard conversations because I'm in my 30s now. And being in your 30s is a wonderful, beautiful thing. So don't let anyone tell you otherwise.